Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Got Ryan here today from 13th Bridge, a new topic we haven't covered yet. So appreciate you hopping on, Ryan, and super excited for this one today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
We'll give us the quick 1 minute, not to put you on the spot, but elevator background of who you are and how you got here, and then we'll start diving into the cool things you're working on in the sports and gaming world today.
So I grew up moving around a lot, lived overseas, all over the U.S., but some of the things that were most consistent in my life were always video games and sports. Sports in particular. I grew up playing a ton of sports, played basketball, baseball, soccer, loved football. When I moved to the U.S., just became a huge sports fan beyond playing, but really a fan of teams. And then when, I'm a little bit older, so when the Sega and Sega Genesis and everything came out, really just got into sports gaming, and very, very different sort of in terms of where I went from there. That was kind of my interest growing up, but I went to Boston College, majored in education. That's all right. I was never a BC fan. I used to go to Villanova basketball.
BU, baby. Terriers.
I'm a Xavier fan. I never liked BC, but I went there because it was a good school, and being in Boston was cool. I was an education major, but graduated in 2000, and at that time it was kind of like take the first job you could get. I ended up working in healthcare. I took a pharmaceutical sales job and spent the next 15, 16 years doing that, and wasn't really my passion. When I finally had an opportunity a few years back to kind of pivot back to some of the things like sports and gaming that I was interested in, started doing some consulting work for Nike, did some copywriting for Steph Curry's Underrated tour, and then kind of said, hey, I want to get back into this, and started a game studio about 3.5 years ago.
Super cool. So give us the rundown of the opportunity you saw there, and 13th Bridge is the name for those wondering, what is this gap you saw? You clearly, to make that jump, you saw something where you're like, hey, I love this stuff, sports and gaming, but like there's a big opportunity here.
Right. So when I was growing up, you had all these different types of sports games, right? You had NBA Jam and NFL Blitz and some of these more arcade style games. And then you started having the games that were trying to get more realistic and more simulation focused. EA with NBA Live and NHL and FIFA and Madden. But it's interesting because if you look at the last 15 to 20 years in sports games, the pendulum has swung completely to the simulation style experiences. And there really haven't been very many arcade style offerings. So I think the first insight we had that really was like, hey, here's the opportunity is we realized a lot of kids were either really into sports games, or they just, even if they were really into sports, they were playing the Call of Duties and Fortnites and all these other games. And we said, wait, there's really not arcade style sports experiences anymore that are more focused on fun than mimicking reality. So that was kind of the first big aha moment that we had. And then we got into the actual opportunities from a market standpoint, and we got into mobile, where greater than 50% of the $200 billion a year in video games is coming from mobile today. That was a huge opportunity. Again, sort of there was that move as these games became more serious and more complex and more simulation focused. They became more difficult, and a lot of more casual gamers lost interest in playing those. So you have that opportunity, and then you have sort of the biggest backlash against a lot of the games today is all the microtransactions. You pay for a game, and then it's just like they're in your pockets trying to make more and more money. And we saw a huge opportunity, as opposed to the pay to win mechanic, to offer a skills to win mechanic that is more focused on the player behind the control versus the attributes that you're, paying money to improve within the game.
Super cool. And I want to go a little bit deeper into some of those trends you were talking about in terms of Gen Z, right? And I think I'm right on the cusp of Gen Z. Like I barely make the cutoff or something like that.
It's a moving target.
Yeah, but essentially all I've known is to hold up my iPhone for people, not for people listening, but I've known the phone. It's been my whole life of games. We were all playing the games on the phone, and then went through, I think it was PS2 was the first console I ever had. And I'm yet to make the jump to the PS5. I don't know. I think GTA will maybe push me across the line when we get there. Yeah, just for that nostalgia. But, what are you seeing in that space, just even as now the younger generations come up? Is it a bigger push to mobile, or what's sort of the state of gaming even?
Yeah, so I think mobile's complicated. I mean, for one thing, there's certain regions where you've seen part of what's driven the growth of gaming, right, has been increased access to Wi-Fi, to mobile technology, more affordable technologies. And in certain regions of the world, mobile is just dominates, right? It's just so big, particularly if you look at like Asia and Africa and some other areas. In the US, it's still very console PC, but mobile is continuing to grow, particularly with the younger generations who are interested in a very different experience. I mean, you do have those people that are on their consoles for hours on end and they're playing. But as gaming has become more social, people want to be able to jump in and out, connect with their friends. You know, when I was growing up, you played a lot of single player games where you and your friends were just sitting around and taking turns playing, you know, a game, or you were just playing against each other. For me at BC, I mean, in the dorms, that was our social gaming. It was, you know, 6 of us in a room, 2 of us playing, you know, Madden against each other, everybody else kind of hanging out. That's very different today because you're playing with people everywhere in the world, and people want to jump into a game. They want to connect with their friends from all over, sometimes people they've never even met. And they want to have more of a social experience. And I think sort of the social fun and the social competition that is really enjoyable and sort of changes the objective of games a lot from I've got to win to I'm going to have a great time competing, but I'm going to have a fun experience. So you see that difference with the younger generation. I think the biggest part of mobile that's made it really challenging is the barriers to entry have gotten very low. I mean, it's very easy to put a game out, to get it on the Apple Store, to get it on the Google Play Store. So you're just flooded with so many options, and they're all free to play. And so a player downloads it and they play it once and then they forget about it and they never play it again. So you see this huge drop off from who's downloading your game to at best you're getting 5% of those people still playing after 30 days. And then with the free to play issue, no one feels like they're walking away from anything. They haven't made an investment, right? So there's a psychological issue that makes mobile very challenging.
Yeah, and I guess now it's a good transition to go into, I guess, the production side, right? And then the actual game side. Like, if you can explain sort of the dynamic. Hey, it's easy to release a game, but then there's actual, like, you guys are building not just one game, you're building this product suite. If you can sort of go into that, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is really to sort of use basketball to prove out this thesis we have that arcade style games really have a huge appeal to Gen Z, Gen Alpha. I mean, there's so much inherent alignment there with quick sessions, with, you know, kids that are very interested in short form content, with creator-led sports. You know, something you've written about and posted about is these creator-led sports leagues and things like that. People don't just want to play with their favorite NBA players. They want to play with their favorite rapper, or they want to play with their favorite streamer or content creator or something like that. So there's so many more opportunities to take that ecosystem of sports and move it beyond sort of the traditional professional athlete. And then you have the professional athletes that are also evolving in terms of their relationship with their fans, right? They're trying to find more ways to do documentary production, to do podcasts, to share who they are off the court, whether they're retired or they're current players, where you have a lot of people that are getting involved in those ventures, as well as businesses and brand building. But what we want to do is, you know, the approach we have to basketball. So I kind of think of our game as a little bit of NBA Jam meets Fortnite, right? You want that fun 2-on-2 type of experience, which is ideal for a smaller mobile screen. And then the Fortnite side of it is, you know, that's called Battle Royale. Drop 100 people on an island, see who's left standing. For me, I was like, well, what's the sports equivalent of that is March Madness, right? It's like this, for a long time, it was my favorite event. These days, a little less so, but it's been my favorite event for so long. And as like a Xavier fan, we're never going to win the whole thing, but if we get to the Sweet 16, if we get to the Elite 8, like that's a win, right? Just the fact that you were there, you were competing. If you're a 16 seed and you give someone who's a 1 seed, you know, a good game, or even if you just get a chance to play on TV and play in a March Madness game, it's a huge win. We said we want to kind of try to create this scenario where instead of 100 people dropped onto an island, drop 32 or 64 teams, you play, see how far you get, you have a great experience. And then if we can prove that out with basketball and really bringing the culture of basketball, you can do that with different sports, because you're basically reimagining these traditional sports formats to appeal to today's mobile gamers. And basketball is a great starting point for us, because you have the culture. You've got very sort of high profile athletes at the center of basketball. And then you also just have this dynamic of basketball. There's so many ways. Any of us that grew up playing ball, there were so many gamified versions of basketball, right? You've got Horse, you've got Knockout, you've got 21, you've got Around the World. There's all these games that we want to bring into this destination for a reimagined basketball, and we want to do that for other sports after.
Yeah, obviously basketball near and dear to my heart. Mine is Xavier constantly beating Pitt in the NCAA tournament. Pitt's my team, but
I was
anyway.
born in Pittsburgh. I wasn't there long, so I don't root against them. But 4 years in Cincinnati for high school, so I became a Xavier.
Craziness. Yeah, not to get too off topic. I'm just curious, real quick. You said you're not as big into March Madness anymore. Any particular reasons why? I feel like people are going to be interested to hear at least a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind so much the one and done programs and kind of how that sort of changed the dynamic a little bit, but it didn't really bother me because you kind of knew which programs. It was Kentucky, you know, it was these programs that were going to have one and done guys. I think when NIL and transfer portal together, when those changes came in, because I really like the NIL, right? I think players should get paid. I think that's great. But the transfer portal now with no penalty, it makes it just free agency, right? And so for me, again, look at Xavier. You've got your handful of guys that came out of Xavier and went pro after a couple of years or something. But that was a program that always, I think, benefited from, you had a lot of 4-year players. They played together. They tended to overachieve in the tournament. They were just one of those teams that you could always bet on them to go like one round further than what they were anticipated to do. And I got to know those players. I knew their stories. I knew how they played together. I mean, some of those guys, Mark Lyons and Tu Holloway, and some of those guys that were just awesome, and Jordan Crawford. Watching those teams was so much fun for 3 or 4 years. Now it's hard to even know who's on the team because there's just so much in and out. And by the time I get to March Madness, I realize like I don't know a lot of these players anymore because they haven't been at the programs for a couple of years. So I think that, and then also now I've got kids, so it's harder to commit, 4 straight days on the first weekend to watch.
Yeah, man, it's fun though, and it's coming up.
It is fun.
And I do agree with you with and it's also interesting you bring up Kentucky, but you're really talking about a Calipari, Arkansas now, and he's not been doing as well since NIL. So it's funny when it's like, hey, your playbook's up. He was definitely paying under the table. It's now like, oh, everyone's doing that. It's funny, like, is he really a good coach, or did he just, play the system?
College sports, it's so different than the pros, right? Because you're not drafting, you're recruiting. And you see what Deion Sanders did at Colorado, and you see someone like Nick Saban and some of the older school coaches that are like, hey, we don't like what this is. Maybe they don't know how to compete in this way, but also, when you think about developing a kid over 3 to 4 years, for some of those guys that was kind of how they approached it, it's harder to do that. Now you see Deion doing it very effectively with bringing guys in and coaching them along, but it's definitely a changing in the coaching ranks in terms of how you approach things.
No doubt. And from the gaming lens, and again, I'm not as well versed in this, but like, you see a lot of companies per se, and they try to bring in big athletes to put them around their product or whatever they're doing. In the gaming world, is there something similar to that where it's like, hey, we want to have them as the face of it, or we want them on board, or how do you guys view on the game side, like actual athlete affiliation?
Yeah. So when I look at, when you look at, like, if you're making a simulation game, it makes sense to have a league-wide license. You want as much reality as you can. You want the full roster for every team, right? You want those things like a 2K or a Madden has. I think when you're looking at mobile, where people want fun, they want quicker, more engaging experiences that you can jump in and jump out of, I think that becomes less important. I think you start to look at what more do I want to create? And when I was growing up, you had like Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I'm dating myself here. You had Bird versus Jordan, or, Bird versus Dr. J even. You had these games that really kind of put the athlete front and center. And I always loved that. I was a kid that was like out by my mailbox waiting for Sports Illustrated so I could read the article about Gary Sheffield, or, Eric Davis, who was my favorite player, all those types of things. And I loved the stories. I loved getting to know the players. And I feel like when you have a league-wide license, you take 2K, like, I love Damian Lillard, right? One of my favorite players. And when he was on the cover, all he got was a couple social media posts and a cut scene in the game. I was like, hey, he's such an interesting guy to me. I want him to be front and center and be able to tell his story. And the nice thing about a mobile game with seasons where you're 2 or 3 months to a season, you can put an individual at the centerpiece. You can make them the focus. And I really love the idea of having them come in and be able to tell their stories, promote the things that they're, sponsors or the products that they're involved with, and also just connect with their fans and make them the centerpiece of a season where they can really play a creative role for those that are interested in that and say, hey, here's how I'm going to tell my story. Here's how I'm going to connect with my fans. And not even just the athletes, but whether it's a musician, whether it's a content creator, someone else that's peripheral to the sort of traditional professional sports role, you can bring them in and you can have them be a centerpiece for the season in the game. So that's how we're kind of really looking at it.
And in these games, or at least for me, maybe I'm an outlier, I actually don't know, but anytime I don't know, what was the last game I did, maybe one of the Call of Duties, but I'm very much a fan of the story, right? Yeah. I need to go play it, feel the story, and then I'll go play multiplayer and get in with my friends. But I gotta that's honestly why I like games. The multiplayer is a nice bonus, social component, whatever. From the mobile standpoint, I'm assuming there's also a story, how do you develop that? How do you build it? Lay out as people are building these games and you want to do something big, what is that process and how do you build the story into it?
Yeah, that's kind of where we started. We had the sort of gameplay idea of, sports royale, March Madness style play. You can jump in and play, and multiplayer offers a lot of things. I'm not a big multiplayer player myself. I'm a story guy. Like GTA, I play the whole story. I don't even do anything beyond that because I love that. My background as an English teacher, I love writing. So the concept I came up with for this game was taking our world, reimagining it a little bit. Thinking about where the NBA might be in several years. And you're already starting to see, these discussions about international basketball leagues. So imagining what if, there's acquisitions between these groups and the NBA is trying to expand and become global, and trying to project that about 20 years and put that in the game. And then thinking about where those other things might arise. And the idea I came up with was the concept for the game is there's this undercover or underground exclusive basketball tournament. It's kind of like the Fight Club of basketball, right? This high stakes, you win, you keep going and you win money, you lose, you go home type of tournament. And very much like a Fight Club, and it's sort of run by this Illuminati style group. So each season we're going to introduce new characters you can play with. You learn their backstories, why they're playing in this tournament as opposed to a 5-on-5 professional league. Like one guy, his father's in gambling debt. And that allows us also to explore issues from our own world, right? So, with sports betting now, you can kind of imagine this situation where this guy gets in trouble. He's betting too much and his son is playing in this tournament to try to buy out his debt. We can explore anything that matters or is important to our audience, the role of analytics in sports or AI in sports and even in coaching. Imagine what that might look like someday. So that's kind of the story. I don't know if you're familiar, but Def Jam Fight for New York was like a fighting game, right? Underground Fight Club type of thing that incorporated real rappers, Snoop Dogg and everyone else, either as fictional characters or as themselves. It was an awesome game, one of my favorite games of all time. We want to do that very similarly, where it's this fictional universe with real people featured in it, as well as these fictional characters.
Super cool. Yeah, I love the story components of these things, brings them to life. Now, as you continue to build this out and go, where are you guys currently at? Where's it going? Where's it headed? What's 2025 even look like for 13th Bridge and the game, the basketball game itself?
Yeah. So we, when I was first starting this, I didn't come from, I'm not going to sit in my basement and develop the game myself and start coding. I'm not that guy. So we started working with a studio that's worked on a lot of leading games, and they started building this. And what we wanted to have was a playable demo version of the game, right? And that took a couple of years to really build out the controls, all the different, mechanics that are part of this. So now we have that playable demo that we're going around and we're showing to some of the gaming companies, some investors. We've had a lot of conversations with NBA players, with rappers, with a bunch of different people that we want to be involved with the game. Actually, on our board, we've got like God Sham God is on there. Eric B from Eric B and Rakim is on there. And we've got some really good contacts and we're having good conversations there. The next step for us the one thing I needed to kind of do was build out my team. And we've now done that where we've brought on Jonathan Anastas, who was at Atari and Activision. He was at One Championship and Clash TV. And then Shelman Bird, who came on as our executive producer, he was at Warner Brothers, Tencent. He's really well known in the gaming industry, very respected, and has worked on a lot of these games that were basketball games. And he has a passion for basketball, which is not always easy to find in the gaming space. Sports sometimes is not where a lot of the gaming people grew up. So we've got that team, and now we're going out and we're doing our fundraising so that we can take this, hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be able to get this soft launched. So from the playable demo we have now to soft launch.
Super cool. And for people entering the gaming space, obviously, like a lot of us have played, but building it, any things you learned or didn't expect just coming into it, I don't want to say an outsider, but coming in like, hey, I'm going to build in this space. I see a gap, but I wasn't, building in it for 20 years. You were doing other cool things.
Yeah, I think that there's always some value to the outsider perspective, and I think that can only take you so far. And you can see like, hey, this is broken. And a lot of people who have lived in an industry for a long time, they lose track of that. They don't see what's broken, or they're so sort of hardened by years of trying to fight those fights that they don't see, they've kind of given up on that. And I think that perspective gave me a lot of energy coming into this. And then we got to a point where it's like, all right, now we need to hammer into the details. And that's where you need really experienced people that are tenured in the space and know what they're doing. And that's what we've brought on. I think probably that there's been so many changes with gaming over the last 3 years. During COVID, gaming really took off with everyone at home and socializing online and everything. And now there's been sort of some normalizing, seeing some of the industry dynamics. It's very highly concentrated. It's $200 billion a year, but 50% of that is driven by 10 companies in the space. So that creates opportunity, but also a lot of challenges. On the mobile end, it's less about the barriers to development and more about the barriers to marketing. It's become a marketing game because these big, highly resourced studios, they can just outmarket anyone and drown out any competitors. They have just so much power. So you saw the kind of big studios really double down on individual franchises coming under a lot of pressure because they're public companies over the last few years where they've gone through a lot of layoffs in the last few years. And now you're starting to see, okay, where are VCs looking at opportunities in gaming? Are they interested in the sort of sustainable, slow growth, mid-range AA studios, or do they just want the big bets on these big studios? So trying to navigate some of that has definitely been probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, 50% from a pretty massive and global industry. That's an interesting stat. Well, first off, appreciate you coming on. This has been awesome. Yeah. Where can people learn more? Do you have websites, socials, play the game? Where's the best place to get any information on what you're doing?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of got a couple of assets right now. I think if you go to 13th Bridge, just 13thbridge.com, you'll learn a little bit about the company. The story, if you're into the story and the lore, we've got sportsroyalstadium.com. So Royale with the E at the end, sportsroyalstadium.com. And then you can kind of dive into, we've got a timeline of hundreds of years of events that have kind of led to this, and a lot of things that you'll kind of recognize if you're really thoughtful about the sports space today and where things might be going, everything from media and betting and analytics and all that involved in that. Those are some of the best places. You can follow us on Instagram, Run the Court Game. We're putting up, and we're going to really double down on focusing on more of our community building and sharing some of our playable demo right there and some of those highlights and clips from that as well.
Super cool. We'll get those links in descriptions and stuff. And Ryan, really appreciate you coming on, and super cool to learn more about the gaming space and what you guys are doing. It's a cool space that is definitely going through some transformations, and you seem to be at the forefront of where it may be headed.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And sports is almost considered a niche in gaming because, like I said, a lot of people didn't grow up with sports that are in the gaming world, and you only have a couple companies there. So we think there's huge opportunities, particularly for younger generations and the creator-led sports initiatives that are out there, and reimagining and sort of gamifying sports. So this makes perfect sense to be on here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Of course.